Part 2, July 22nd to July 27th, 1894. We all took a bath this morning. Mr. and Mrs. Cooley and the children went into the river. Paul and George had a rope around them and tried to swim. Rose went out with Mrs. Cooley. She had a rope around her and I held on to its end. She went out waist deep and paddled around and sat down up to her chin. The Russians have hung around us all day, children and grown folks both. They cannot talk, and they understand only a little. They are very kind. They brought milk and a great pan of biscuits and gave them to us, showing us that they were presents. The biscuits are light and very good. We got to feel a little acquainted with the folks, told them all our names and asked theirs, and let them swing in the hammock and sit in the chairs. They're very curious and want to examine everything, talking about it to each other. They wanted us to come to their houses, so Manly and I went. They showed us the geese, and we watched the milkmaids milk. They look like pictures of German and Russian milkmaids and peasants. Their yellow hair is combed smooth down each side of their faces and hangs in long braids behind, and they wear handkerchiefs over their heads. They are all dressed alike. There are no sleeves in the women's long blue calico dresses, but under them they wear white shirts with long white sleeves. The men have whiskered cheeks and long golden beards. They wear blue blouses that hang down long to their knees almost, with belts around their waists. They were all very polite and smiling, seeming to try to say they were glad we came. They gave us another big pail of fresh warm milk, and Manly gave them a fire mat. One man seemed quite Americanized. Manly said to him slowly that the mat will not burn, and he said that he understood. He may not believe it, but if he tries it, he'll find out. When we were leaving, a woman opened the front of her dress and took out a baking of cold biscuits from right against her bare skin and gave them to me. The man told me to put them in my shirt, but I carried them in Manly's clean handkerchief instead. The man said it was hard for people to cook when traveling. They're very kind people. A pity to waste the biscuits, but we could not eat them. The Russians have a great huge dog. He was higher than my belt as we stood together, and his great head looked like a wolf's, only larger. His ears were trimmed to make them like a wolf's ears, and he was bright brown all over. He was very loving. He rubbed against Rose and me, and we put our arms around his big neck. There was a little puppy just like him, and Manly tried to buy it, but they would not sell. They have splendid barns and great corn cribs and a windmill. Their land runs along the river. Each man works his own land, but all of them together own all the stock in common. We spent a most pleasant Sunday, and we are rested. Paul climbed onto Little Pet's back, and the colt did not care. He was gentle. July 23rd. We started at 8. Hated to leave our camping place. It seems quite like home. We crossed the James River, and in 20 minutes we reached the top of the bluffs on the other side. We all stopped and looked back at the scene, and I wished for an artist's hand or a poet's brain, or even to be able to tell in good plain prose how beautiful it was. If I had been the Indians, I would have scalped more white folks before I ever would have left it. We could see the river winding down the valley, the water gleaming through the trees that grow on the bank. Beyond it, the bluffs rose high and bare, browned and burned above the lovely green trees and grass and shining water. On this side, the bluffs again were gigantic brown waves, tumbled and tossed about. On this side of the James, we have passed fields of corn 8 feet high. There are cottonwood hedges along the road, the trees 10 inches through to 35 and 40 feet tall. But it all seems burned and bare after our camping grounds by the river. 10 o'clock. It is 101 in the shade in the wagon and hardly a breath of air. At 11 o'clock, 9 miles from Yankton, we stopped at a windmill to water the horses. The man who owned the house told us he paid $5,000 for 3 80s without a building. Not far from Yankton, we crossed a bone-dry creek bed with the most desolate barren bluffs on each side, covered with stones, and the grass was dry and brown. They looked like great drifts of sand that somehow had stopped drifting. We reached Yankton at 4 o'clock, drove by the insane asylum. The buildings look nice, and they stand in the middle of a large farm of acres and acres of corn and potatoes. Manly wanted to stop and go through the asylum, but I could not bear to, so we did not. We passed by the Yankton College. The buildings are very nice. I'm greatly disappointed in Yankton. It is stick in the mud. We drove all over town to find a little feed for the teams. Went to the mill and the elevator and the feed stores and finally found a couple of sacks of ground feed, but not a bit of flax in the whole town. Extra at SERP. Flaxseed was indispensable first aid to hurts and minor ills. A boiling hot flaxseed poultice holds hotter heat longer than a bread and milk one, and it usually works better than layers of cold vinegar and brown paper. Rose Wilder Lane. There were no green vegetables, nor any figs nor dates in the grocery stores. It would be a blessing to Yankton if Carpenter would move down here, or if folks in Yankton would send to De Smet for what they need. They have a number of elevators, 2 or 3 mills, and 6 feed stores, but we carried the most of the feed away in 2 sacks. I got my revolver fixed. Then we had to spend so much time hunting for feed all over town that Mr. Cooley got to the ferry first. Mrs. Cooley and Paul crossed the river. Then the ferry came back and took Mr. Cooley over. It was leaving just as we drove down to the landing at 6 o'clock, and while we were waiting for it to come back, a bad-looking storm came up. It was not rain, only wind and dust. We had to face the river to keep the wagons back to the wind so that it would not be blown over. The wind lifted the hind wheels twice before Manley could get them roped down. The ferryman did not like to try and cross the river in the storm. He waited on the other side until the blow was over, and we were afraid we would not cross again that night. But he did. Side note, when the rear wheels lifted, as if the wagon were going end over end into the river, my father jumped out, leaving the reins in my mother's hands, while she held and gentled the nervous horses. I craned around the edge of the side curtain to see what my father was doing. He was driving a picket pin into the ground and tying a wheel to it with the picket rope. Behind us was a covered wagon, behind it another and another. As far as I could see, covered wagons stood one beyond another in a long, long line. Behind them and over them and high over half the sky, a yellow wave of dust was curling and coming. My mother said to me, "That's your last sight of Dakota." Rose Wilder Lane. Where we cross the Missouri, it is 1 mile wide, very nasty and muddy. I do not wonder it is called the Big Muddy. And since I have seen the dust blowing into it, I do not think it strange that it is muddy. The Missouri is nothing as like beautiful as the Jim. Pet made no fuss at all at the ferry, but drove over it nicely, stood as quiet as could be, and calmly drove off it. Her little colt Pet ran onto it loose and stood beside her as still as a mouse. About a mile from the river, we camped in the woods. Temperature 98. July 24th. Mr. Cooley got up early and went fishing, but did not get a bite. We were all tired from being up so late last night and did not get started until 9 o'clock. We had taken the wrong road, so we had to go back to the river and start again on the right one. For a little way we followed the river and we could see down it, 4 or 5 miles across the water. It was a grand sight, though the scenery on the banks is nothing. What is it about water that always affects a person? I never see a great river or lake, but I think how I would like to see a world made and watch it through all its changes. The banks of the Missouri are crumbling all the time and falling into the water. In one place, the road has fallen in. There on the river flats, before we reached the bluffs, we saw 24 haystacks at one time, and mowing had only begun. 4 mowing machines were working. Hay is $9 a ton in Yankton. Well, we have come to the bluffs. On the side next the river, they look as if they had been cut straight down with a knife. Grass has not grown on the face. All along the foot of it, trees are growing, sheltered from the south wind. Plums, grapes, black currants, and sweet clover grow wild on the bottomland. Sweet clover 8 feet high, and the first oak trees we have seen. We have been going over the bluffs, the most desolate bare hills I ever saw, without houses or fields or trees and hardly any grass. Manley said he would just as soon own the whole of Nebraska as not, if it were fenced. Judging from all he has ever seen of the state, it might do for pasture if he did not keep much stock. So far, Nebraska reminds me of Lydia Lockett's pocket. Nothing in it, nothing on it, only the binding round it. We meet covered wagons going north. Manley talked to a couple of men traveling from Kansas to South Dakota. They said there is nothing in Kansas. The hens are laying yet. Temperature 110. We spent the night among the Nebraska hills. Down in a hollow, they shut us in and not a house in sight. This morning I liked to look at the hills. There is something fascinating in their loneliness. We started at 7:35. It is a nice cool morn. We went through Harrington at 8:30. It is a nice town. I like it much better than Yankton, though it is smaller. Passed through Coleridge at 12:30. Not much of a place. The wind is blowing and the dust flying till we can hardly see. Talk about hard roads in Dakota. I never saw hard roads till now. The more I see of Nebraska, the less I like it. We've been climbing over the bluffs all day. Just south of Coleridge, there are 22 families that are going to start for Missouri in about 6 weeks, though this country is very thinly settled. One man said he has lived here for 6 years and has not seen a good crop yet. We camped east of the town of Belden 1 mile, but within sight of it by a creek. Not so much as a bush to be seen. Manley did the chores so Mr. Cooley could go fishing. He caught 11 fish. Temperature 109. The man living near where we camped is working for a man in Sioux City who owns 3,000 acres of land in a body. 500 acres of it were in pasture and 250 in meadow. July 26th. Mr. Cooley went fishing again this morning and caught 2. We were on the road again at 8:40. There has been plenty of rain right here, and crops are good, corn, wheat, and oats. But 3 miles west they have nothing. The land is $25 an acre here. Met a load of immigrants at noon. They're going north. Thermometer 110 in the shade. This afternoon we met a family of immigrants, man, woman, and 2 children. They had been to Missouri and are coming back. They started from Moody County, Dakota, the 8th of May and went to Taney County, Missouri. They stayed only 10 days and started back. Have been on the road ever since. They would not live in Missouri if you gave them the whole of it. Why, hardly any of the houses have any windows in them, just holes, and lots of women have never seen a railroad train nor an organ. And the land is awfully stony. They think of stopping in Cedar County, Nebraska. Crops are poor since noon. Country about as dry as Dakota. Went through Windside about 4 o'clock. Roads are awfully hilly, and Mr. Cooley wishes we had kept farther west and gone to Columbus instead of Schuyler. Crossed Humbug Creek and camped by the first house south. The people are Germans and very nice. They gave us milk. Humbug Creek and Windside are well named, only they should have spelled it Windside. We have faced a hot, hard wind all day. July 27th. Started at 8:15. We have gone through Cedar County and went through the Wayne County, Nebraska. We cannot tell when we come to a county line as we could in Dakota. The roads pay no attention to section lines, but wander up and down and around the hills. The soil in Wayne County is very fine and close. Not exactly clay, but clayey. The people here claim it is the best soil on earth to stand drought. Crossed the line into Stanton County at 9. There are large pastures and grain fields are all fenced. A good many sleek cattle are in sight. Cornfields are 3 miles long and as far back as you can see. There are a few groves. Wind blows hard but cool this morning. At 10:20 we saw an orchard with apples. The hills are covered with corn as far as the eye can see. Acres and acres of corn. Lots of groves. Nearly all the people are Germans. One gave Manley 2 large apples off his trees. He has a large orchard and the trees hang full. Just past a house where the man owns 540 acres of land and has 300 hogs. A little farther on, a farm of 500 acres, the owner had 450 hogs and only 50 bushels of old corn. He says if it does not rain within 24 hours, the tassels on the new crop will dry and he will not harvest a kernel of corn. The corn looks nice to us, but I suppose the farmers here know. Their wheat sold only for 32 cents a bushel last year, and it's 32 cents now. We came into the Elkhorn Valley at 1:45, and it is pretty, very level with many groves and nice houses, and natural timber along the river. An immigrant team is behind us, and every minute I expect to hear the usual. Where did you come from? Where are you going? How are the crops up your way? This never, hardly ever fails. Found an ear of corn 10 inches long and 7 inches round. Arrived at Stanton at 3 p.m. It is a good-looking town, large pretty buildings, clean big houses with trees. People, mostly Germans. German signs on the stores and German texts on the churches. Wheat is now going 16 to 20 bushels to the acre. Corn is killed by the hot wind. Yesterday it was 126 in the shade here in Stanton. Crossed the Elkhorn River on a bridge. A few miles farther on, we camped by the side of the road in the shade of some trees. There was a gang of horse traders on the river, and we did not want to camp near them.